Good afternoon, everyone. We'll be starting the presentation in just one moment. Okay, I think we can get started. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us today for our webinar, Family Promise ROI, the Impact of Your Investment. My name is Melissa Bigger, and I'm the Director of Impact Giving and Communications at Family Promise National, and I'll be your moderator today. We'll be sharing with you the impact of the global health pandemic on the landscape of family homelessness and our work at Family Promise, as well as the many ways that your support for families battling homelessness is changing the way we address this crisis. Over the past year, we've seen a dramatic increase in the need for services. You'll hear about the focus of our efforts, new programming, and innovative partnerships that your support has made possible to help more than 100,000 family members just since the onset of the pandemic last spring. We'll be offering a second broadcast of this presentation on Monday, March 29th at 3:00 p.m. Eastern Time. Now, before I introduce our panel, I'll just go over some basic housekeeping matters. First, next slide, Katie. All attendees are in listen-only mode, which means that your microphones are on mute. You can use the question function on your screen for any questions or comments once we begin. We'll be answering questions as we go, as well as at the end of the presentation, so feel free to submit them at any time. This presentation is scheduled for 30 minutes, and we'll try to address any questions that come up during this time. We can run a little longer if necessary, and if we're unable to get to all of your questions by the end of the presentation, we can certainly follow up with you afterward too. Also, today's presentation is being recorded and will be posted to our YouTube channel. So today we are joined by the Family Promise National Leadership Team, Klaas Ehlers, Kara Bradshaw, and Sandy Minuti. Klaas is the Chief Executive Officer of Family Promise and has been with the organization for nearly 20 years. Since he became CEO in 2016, Family Promise has grown to serve more than 100,000 people a year. Klaas is a prominent thought leader in the nonprofit sector, and he sits on the community board for Overlook Hospital, the community advisory group for the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, but he's proudest of his role on the community advisory board for Sesame Street and Communities. Kara is Family Promise's Chief Impact Officer and manages the development and communications departments, overseeing fundraising, special events, public relations, donor relations, and communications and marketing efforts. And Sandy is the Chief Operating Officer of Family Promise and oversees the regional directors and affiliate services staff to ensure the overall health and success of affiliates and the coordination of national programs. So now, without further ado, I will turn the microphone over to Klaas.
Well, thank you very much, Melissa. So we are going to be covering, as Melissa described, these key areas. And we'll have Sandy talking a lot about the operational elements, how it's affected families, and Kara talking about how we have communicated the messages on this. And then I'm going to lean in and talk a little bit about what your investments have done, the impact it's had, and how it's not just about what we're doing right now in the pandemic, but how we're building structures so that we have long-term impact on families at risk of or experiencing homelessness. And I think before I hand it over to Sandy, I think it's Sandy next, right? Yeah, okay. Before I hand it over to Sandy, I think it's important to frame this that family homelessness was an incredible crisis before the pandemic. 1 out of 16 children in this country was experiencing homelessness in some form or other by the time they graduated to the first grade. And the pandemic disproportionately affected populations that were low income, that were disenfranchised, both in the health impacts and the economic impacts. And so we really leaned in this past year to try to address those. So with that, I will turn it over to Sandy.
Thank you, Klaas. Next slide, please. So as I'm sure you have read in our communications, you've seen in the news, you've heard from speaking with people in your own community, and as Klaus just shared, the pandemic has dramatically increased poverty in America. Over 20% of renters are behind on rent, amounting to over $50 billion. And despite the federal eviction moratorium, landlords have filed hundreds of thousands of evictions during this time. Nearly 81 million adults are having a difficult time paying their regular expenses, such as food, rent, mortgage, car payments, medical expenses. Up to 10 million children live in households where they don't have enough food to eat. Women have lost over 5 million jobs since the pandemic began. Not only are their jobs vanishing, but women are faced with the added issue of caretaking and dealing with virtual schooling, which as a mom I know is a challenge. So they've given up their professional responsibilities and simply quit. As a result of the pandemic, 8 million Americans have slipped into poverty, with the circumstances worsening for Black people and children. These stats certainly demonstrate the scale of need in America, but they also show how variable the need is. Addressing each family's holistic need, no matter if that's housing, transportation, food, employment, or a combination of some or all those, is what Family Promise does best. For example, Family Promise of Metro West, our affiliate outside of Boston, connected with a mom who's doing college, which, like many of us, became an online function during COVID. However, she was at home with her 2 young children, and they also had to do school virtually, but the family only had 1 computer. So Family Promise of Metro West was able to step in, secure computer donations for that family so that they all could continue their online learning, studying, and homework. And this is just a very small example of the very individualized support that Family Promise provides to families. Next slide, please. So as you can imagine, when the pandemic hit, our traditional model of serving families in congregate shelter became an impossibility. Overnight, affiliates had to ensure their staff and volunteers were safe, ensure that they could effectively work remotely, and they had to find whole new models to continue to help families in need. I've been incredibly impressed with the resiliency and innovation of the affiliates across our country. They found new ways to provide emergency shelter, such as using hotel space. They've expanded their programming upstream, working to prevent families from losing their housing and safely diverting families from shelter via creative case management when a family did become homeless. And they've deepened their relationship with former guests of the program to ensure that they remain stably housed. I'll share one quick story of family help by Family Promise of Jacksonville, which was one of the affiliates to receive funding from the national office during the pandemic to help them pivot their programming. So after 2 full years of living in a motel, Stephanie and James and their son were able to move in an apartment with the help of Family Promise staff. Unfortunately, when COVID hit, James lost his job as a transportation driver, and the family had to return their vehicle to the company they were leasing it from. Family Promise again stepped in and provided rental assistance to the family. They also connected the family with a donor who was able to help them purchase CPR training mannequins so James could jumpstart a new business during the pandemic. They found another donor that helped the family secure new van so James could reopen his transportation services and that the family didn't have to rely on the bus system to get them to where they needed to go. So again, this is just one small example of one affiliate and many stories and many families that they connect with, but it shows how Family Promise can not only prevent a family from experiencing homelessness, but how we can also provide those wraparound stabilization services to make sure that the family is thriving. Next slide.
So our brand and PR reach has expanded due to a combination of our increased efforts in our digital storytelling and really elevating the voices of low-income families. So one story that I wanted to share with you is from Family Promise of Lawrence County, South Carolina. A single mom named Natalie was $7 shy of her monthly rent payment when she and her 2 children were evicted from their home last February. So that was right before COVID hit. They found Family Promise, but with debt and eviction on Natalie's record, not to mention the disruption caused by the pandemic, finding housing was a huge challenge. Family Promise was able to get her into her own home within a few weeks. Supporters in the community donated furniture, household supplies, and toys, as well as food and gift cards. She's been receiving case management, working on her job search, budgeting, goal setting, and all the skills she needs to become independent long-term. She's also been studying for a high school degree and her driver's test and is setting new goals with the help of her case manager. So in all of our efforts, in our branding and our PR, we really want to put those stories at the forefront. And doing that with our affiliates has helped us see a really great organic jump in our coverage of the issue, which has raised overall awareness. And the efforts of our board, volunteers, donors in sharing our messaging has really helped in that. One example is we've had a big increase in our web traffic last year, largely due to COVID and people wanting to help. One of those was we had a Jeopardy video that featured a Family Promise volunteer and supporter, and that brought a bunch of new support and awareness to the issue. Forever 21, a partner of ours, also made mask donations to the affiliates, and their customer base was actually the 4th highest traffic driver to our website. So you can see there that volunteers, supporters, corporate partners can really help in driving our brand and issue awareness. We also had several major media placements in 2020 related to the pandemic and our response. We were featured in the New York Times, Washington Post, Huffington Post, CNN, Yahoo Finance. And again, the story centered on those with lived experience of housing insecurity during the pandemic. And so far this year, in just the first quarter of the year, we've had front page prominence on the pandemic's effect on housing, and it led to conversations and opening with several foundations. We were also featured in a big spread in The Guardian about 2 single moms navigating pandemic life in California. Our Housing Heroes campaign on Twitter, which launched in December, has highlighted experts and connected us with the press, and it's helped us forge new relationships with media experts. Next slide.
All right. So to pivot off of that, again, as I said at the beginning, right, where we looked at 2020, that was such an unprecedented year, such a challenging year for families, for the entire country. And we really leaned in to be able to provide services for families in that emergency situation in 2020. But all of this has been done with an eye towards, right, you don't want to just solve a problem today, you want to solve a problem long term. And it's always been Family Promise's approach, always been our attitude. So a lot of what we've done this year, and again, what we've done with the investment of you, our donors, our supporters, our funders, is how do we help people right now, but how do we build the structures that have long-term implications? And a lot of that has come through our corporate partnerships. So, you know, here's just 4 of our many partnerships, and I want to touch a little bit on this from a strategic standpoint. So partnerships are great because obviously they bring in more funding, they bring in more volunteers. They also do a lot to raise awareness, people understand the issue. They help us with professional expertise, and they help us with solutions. And I'll highlight each one of these a little bit. So Clayton is our fantastic partner. They're a company that makes homes, but they've actually invested heavily in our Future Begins at Home program, which is designed to keep people from experiencing homelessness in the first place. How do we keep them in their housing? And we really appreciate that partnership because of this, we were able to launch a diversion program nationally. And diversion means a family that is at imminent risk of homelessness. How do you divert them from actually being homeless, actually having to be in shelter? And I'll give 3 quick examples of that, because we did this around the country. In Wyoming, diversion was as simple as getting a mom 4 new tires on her car so that she could move back to Kansas where she had family, where she could have a job and where she could have stability. That kept her out of homelessness. In Indiana, it was an issue of mediating. It's 2 sisters that were living together. They couldn't live together any longer. but the one sister was just 2 weeks away from getting her first paycheck, which was going to guarantee her ability to afford her rent. So rather than have that family become homeless and have all of that disruption, we were able to step in and keep that family stable until she got that first paycheck and could get into her housing. And then here in New Jersey, right where we're located, it's been as simple as helping a family with their grocery bills that allowed a 3-generation family to stay together in COVID. And in COVID, you cannot think of a worse time at which to have to experience homelessness than in the midst of a pandemic. All of that was made possible by partners like Synchrony and Clayton and others on this list here. And I'll point out to the National Real Estate Investors Association, this is a partnership that we're working on that is going to help us build more relationships with landlords so that it's not just about getting families into housing, it's how can they keep that housing? And building that relationship with our partners in the landlord community is a way to ensure those families keep housing. The last example I'll give is not on here because we can't officially release it yet, but it is with a very large company that you've all probably heard of and probably used in the past few days, that is working with us on workforce development, helping adults in our programs go through 200 hours of accreditation training. So they end up with a certificate for IT or project management that'll probably mean about a $30,000 to $35,000 increase in their earning potential and put them on a course from a job to a career. So that's how we look at things at Family Promise. Yes, we're about getting families into housing, but it's all of these other aspects that ensure they keep housing. Next slide, please, Katie. So, looking at the investment impact, right? Because one of the things that we always like to say is, yes, we have donors, we have funders, but really you're all investors and you're investing in the long-term future for children. And you can see all these children in these pictures here. What we think about at Family Promise is how do we change the future for those children? Because a child who experiences homelessness is going to have their future marked by that. They're much more likely to repeat grades, drop out of school, have mental health issues, and a whole myriad of elements that are really going to cut off many of the opportunities that that child can have. When Family Promise comes in, because of the support you have given us, we're able to clear those obstacles and make sure that child has the opportunity that every child deserves. That's why we really believe you are helping us change the future for children. Next slide, please. So I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the things that we're doing moving forward. So I've got 2 slides about that, and then we're going to wrap up and get into conversation. But what we are focusing on is how do we expand our impact, right? Everything is about impact. Everything you do is about helping us have more impact. So some of the initiatives that we're undertaking, one is increasing technology support. We have seen this year, this right now is an example of technology. Right, this donor town hall. We've seen with work at home, with school at home, how critically important technology is and how much a technology gap disadvantages low-income families. Also disadvantages it disadvantages nonprofit organizations. So we're trying to figure out how to increase that technology support, which helps us serve more families. Working virtually, we can work with lots of families that we can't do it face-to-face in a pandemic, and even not in a pandemic. We expand, we multiply our effect when we can engage more technology. We're also looking at volunteerism programs. A couple slides before, we have Progressive, one of our wonderful new partners that is heavily engaged in volunteerism, both in person, but also a lot of virtual volunteerism. When you've got people with professional skills, whether it's financial capability or helping people with their resumes or anything like that, that's something you can do virtually as well. And we're really excited about our ability to kind of expand our volunteerism to a virtual model. We also are taking very seriously the issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion because more than 50% of the families that experience homelessness in this country are Black, while people who are Black make up about 13% of the overall population. That's directly connected to issues of structural racism. And we have seen how COVID has disproportionately affected populations of color. So we're really leaning in on how do we address those underlying issues. And that ties to our advocacy and awareness, right? The more that people understand the issue of family homelessness, the more they recognize they need to do something. And the beauty is Family Promise always offers a local way to have an impact, whether it's making a meal, whether it is spending the night, whether it is helping children with their reading, whether it's helping a mom with her resume, whether it's getting a family set up with a vehicle. There's always ways we can help on a local level. At the same time that we're looking at things on a national level as well in terms of advocacy. Affiliate expansion, there are so many communities that still need services for families at risk of and experiencing homelessness, and recognize Family Promise as that model that really works, that engages the community, that is not about kind of throughputs, but rather about outcomes. So we are going to be doing some more expansion of affiliates, bringing Family Promise to new communities. Shelter models. Congregate shelter is not congruent with the pandemic, right? We learned that, so we have worked on different ways of approaching shelter. Sandy touched on that. And of course, all these best practices to help affiliates do the best work they can do at preventing homelessness, providing services, and doing that long-term stabilization. So moving on to the next slide, but wait, there's more. Next slide, Katie. There we go. Okay. So we do a lot with our affiliates by providing them grants, and we're going to be focusing on grants for stabilization programs and housing programs, right? Because affordable housing is such a critical issue. We're helping support them with technology. We are increasing the infrastructure so we can do a better job of serving our affiliates. And so much of what goes on is just helping our affiliates run programs that keep people in the housing, right, that prevent the homelessness in the first place. So we continue to look at ways that we can increase those services. And I think it's really important to recognize that when the pandemic hit, the #1 priority was the health of our families, right? We had tens of thousands of families that we were serving. How could we secure their health? And I'm very proud to say that, to our knowledge, we've not had a family that was in any of our shelter programs actually, thank goodness, die from COVID. And I think it's a testament to our affiliates, and it's a testament to our volunteers and people who care so much, that wanted to make sure that families could be safe. The other element was, how do we address the economic impacts? And that's what we've been doing this past year. And what we're doing now is, as we're seeing some help coming with some additional government funding and so on, how do we pivot to make those long-term changes so that a family that was at risk of homelessness or experienced homelessness last year, in 3 years, is not only no longer at risk of homelessness, but is actually separated from poverty. They can think about using money for enrichment for their children, for their family, not just for every, and not every penny has to go to a core basic need. That's the American dream. That's the aspiration we have. And that's why we say it's all about changing the future for children, because that's the future every child should have. So I think with that, I will turn it back to, am I turning it back to you, Melissa? No, I'm turning it back to Kara and Sandy. Okay, guys.
Yes, so we have some exciting campaigns coming up and opportunities for donors and volunteers to engage. So we have our Giving Day on April 21st. It's our second Giving Day. Our first was in 2019, and last year has turned into a COVID emergency campaign that, thanks to many of your support, helped us raise nearly $1 million. This year, we're super excited to announce that our national board is contributing more than $230,000 for a match. And so we'll be putting that out there, and you'll be seeing more about that in the coming weeks. But we are absolutely thrilled with that, because we can leverage the support of our donor community and really amplify giving. Giving will open on our site on April 14th. It's fpgives.org, and we'll be sharing information on how you can sign up to become a fundraiser for the campaign or to share information and graphics. So be on the lookout for the email that'll be coming about on or around April 14th. Our June Night Without a Bed, June 26th, is in its second year. It's an opportunity to spend a night not in your bed and participate in a social media campaign to raise awareness and funds of how many families in America are sleeping in a motel, in their car, or on a friend's couch on any given night. It's a great opportunity for the whole family, for kids really enjoy it. And for both campaigns, we're offering our partners also toolkits to engage their teams in raising awareness and funds, and we'll do the same for individuals.
Great, and I'll just touch base real quick on our Innovation Summit. So historically at Family Promise, every 18 months, we would have an in-person conference, and about 400 Affiliate staff, volunteers, and board members would attend in person, but of course with COVID that wasn't possible last year, so we quickly pivoted. And we had a virtual summit, and it was a tremendous success with over 1,000 attendees. So we're planning it again this May. We've planned over a dozen different workshops, including those that cover topics like fundraising, communications, operations, programming, volunteerism, working with landlords, and beyond. There's a wonderful mix of outside speakers, national staff, and affiliate staff that will be presenting. There's a plenary that Kara's organizing that will touch on some of these topics about how the pandemic has particularly had a negative impact on women. Our keynote speaker is Amanda Indiri from Funders Together to End Homelessness, and I know that those that have seen our communications about her being our keynote are really excited to hear her speak. I've had the pleasure to hear her speak at another conference, and she's quite impressive. And Senator Brookler will also address the attendees with a motivational speech. So in short, this will be another really tremendous learning opportunity for our network of affiliate staff, boards, and volunteers.
Thank you so much, Kara and Sandy. I want to just say we have the most remarkable team here at Family Promise. Melissa and Katie are also on this. Everybody on this team is exceptional and so committed and passionate about the work we do. It really makes it an absolute joy and pleasure to be serving this organization. We also have a phenomenal board that I would say the same about, right? Just are people who are passionate, committed, strategic. So I want to thank them, but I want to thank all of you. You know, most of you who are on this town hall have donated in some way or other, and they said you're not donors, you're investors. You've made a tremendous investment. You've invested in the future of children like those two boys right there, and I cannot think of a more meaningful thing to do, and I cannot thank you enough for that. So that's sort of a summary. We'll talk about the events are a lot of fun. I slept on my deck last year for a night without a bed, so it really is kind of a neat event to do. So I encourage everybody to do that. And what I love about it is, you know, it's nice. It can be a fundraising event, but it's really an awareness event. It gets people just thinking about that, considering the dynamics of family homelessness and all the implications. So with that, I'll turn it over to Melissa for any questions that we may have. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah, a few questions came in, so I'll just read them and you can determine who will answer. The first question, is emergency shelter still a priority for Family Promise? Has the shelter model changed for good now, or do you see Family Promise returning to a focus on shelter once the pandemic has subsided?
We will still need shelter. Like we're trying to move towards a world where shelter is not something that you need, right? Everybody can either be kept in the housing or put in housing. And I think we've made some progress that way. And Family Promise is very much, you know, involved and a leader in that. But as long as there is a need for shelter, we intend to continue to provide shelter because, quite frankly, Family Promise does an incredible job of providing shelter because it's not about, hey, do you have a roof over your head, but rather do you have hospitality and do you have a basis from which you can move forward to the life that you really, you know, that you want, to a life that is defined by stability, security, and safety.
What do you think the affordable housing landscape looks like for the next year or two as a result of the COVID crisis? Do you see things continuing to worsen?
You want me to answer that, Sandy? So, you know, the American Recovery Act is putting a lot of resources into poverty issues. It's a pretty tremendous piece of legislation that way. So yes, on the one hand, we're going to see a lot of relief on homelessness, but we see people, families that, you know, were hardworking families that when the pandemic hit, weren't able to make rent and are like $15,000 in arrears. So it's a pretty big hole to fill. And the underlying issue is we simply do not have enough affordable housing in this country for the people who need it. And you can see that just in sort of the disparity, right? Since 1960, adjusted for inflation, wages have gone up 5% and housing costs have gone up 60%. That in itself defines, you know, that's why those people who can remember the 1960s, you had a very different housing environment. You know, everybody could access housing. That isn't the case today. And it is really important that we continue to work on ways to create more affordable housing, to convert housing to affordable housing, to look at inclusionary zoning that allows more affordable housing to to be built in communities, in all communities. So yes, it remains a really big challenge.
Okay. Someone's asking, do you see any of the CARES Act stimulus funds going to benefit Family Promise programs?
I guess I'll take that one. Yeah, affiliates have received a tremendous amount of funding. And I think something that they're grappling now is how they change their models, how do they scale up? I mean, they've been very concentrated on helping people and getting that money to people as quickly as possible. But that gives us this great opportunity that in many communities across the country, affiliates have grown over this past year. So I think that puts them in a place for success moving to the future, that they can continue to serve more and more people.
Okay. Another one is, what types of graduate support services are you providing for families once they get back into housing?
I guess I'll take that one again. I think, again, it's a plethora of services. And the thing that I value most about Family Promise is that we take a very individualized approach for each family. So it's not that you come in and this is the checklist. You know, you come in to our program and we're going to get you whatever services you need. Like in the one example I talked about, a family simply needed some computers. Class talked about a family, they needed tires. I mean, we all have different needs, and I think that's a real value that Family Promise brings into the world. And so it may be helping a family find better jobs, it may be helping them improve their financial literacy. It's a whole wide range of programs that we will provide to keep those families stably housed.
Okay. When and where will the next Clayton home donation be?
We just got that's a great question. We just got that finalized. Which one is first? Do we know which one's first?
I'm not sure. I know we have, we're in process of releasing all that information, but there's scheduled to be 3 home donations this year, which will be very exciting. And I think they'll take place in the second and later half of the year.
And Carrie, you were at our last home donation in Tennessee. I mean, those are, if you get a chance, go online, Google Clayton Family Promise home donation and watch some of the video from it, because it's such a wonderful experience. Carrie, do you want to talk a little bit about your experience of that last donation?
Yeah, I relocated to Western North Carolina last summer, and you know, the challenge of moving during a pandemic it's interesting, but one of the upsides and the real highlight of my year was being able to attend actually 3 Clayton home donations last year, because I was within driving distance, and because they're outside in small groups, we were able to hold them. So what I really love about it is it's a really tangible outcome of our partnerships and our donor support. And you see the impact it makes on a family to be walking into a home that they have the keys to, that's an asset for them. It's really heartwarming, but then also financially it's going to make a huge impact for them. Also seeing in Tennessee, it was a transitional home for a family, and so both having those permanent housing solutions, and then also the transitional housing, particularly at a time when there's so little affordable housing stock, it really made a difference. And that that family was moving in right before the holidays, and their home was all decorated, and the kids were jumping up and down, and it's that makes all the difference in the world to see that.
And I actually want to jump in with two quick points related to this. One is, so Clayton is a fantastic partner, and when we've done the Clayton home donations, we've had other partners like Belk be involved, and TJX. We have really wonderful corporate partners. As blessed as we are with this incredible board with these magnificent donors, our corporate partners are just wonderful collaborators, and give yes, they give funding and they give material resources. They give a lot of expertise and a lot of awareness too. And the other point I wanted to make is that the home donation in Maryville, Tennessee. Maryville is a relatively small city, and we actually have a fair number of affiliates in rural areas, because I think it's always like to bring this out. I grew up 2 miles outside of a town of 300 people, so I grew up in the suburbs, I suppose, of a town of 300 people. But people in rural areas have the same issues with poverty and homelessness as you have in urban areas. A lot of times people kind of conceive of homelessness as an urban issue. It is a unilateral issue across this country. And there are so many families in rural areas that are dealing with the same challenges of housing instability and homelessness. And so, the example that Kara gave of being in Blount County, that's an example where we have an affiliate doing incredible work in a largely rural area, serving families there. So I just wanted to point that out because I think that is in the areas and as people conceive of homelessness in small boxes, it is everywhere.
Okay, we just have one last question, and this is actually very apropos given social distancing that's still going on. How can people get involved with volunteering today?
So we certainly have fewer of the kind of face-to-face opportunities. Those will come back to a large degree post-pandemic, but as much as the pandemic has been such an awful experience, it has forced everyone to kind of think about new ways of approaching things. And one thing we've seen is with volunteerism, we've seen this real growth in virtual volunteerism. So, and it's enabled people, if you live in Dubuque and you want to volunteer in Hawaii, you can without having to get on an airplane. I guess you'd want to get on an airplane to go to Hawaii, but let's say you couldn't. You can still volunteer because you can do a lot of virtual volunteering. So people can get involved. We have a portal on our website you can click on, and you can identify where and what kind of skills you provide. We can make those matches and so on. And we're building a lot more programming so that we can enable more virtual volunteerism. And at the very least, we're finding this with a lot of our corporate partners. They love doing things like the Night Without a Bed and other awareness raising events because when people learn about the extent of family homelessness and the implications long term about allowing so many children in this country to experience homelessness, the easiest thing to do is just tell other people, because I think as a country, if we really fully understood the scope of family homelessness, we would be directing resources and policy and energy towards solving it, and we would solve it.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much, Kara, Klaas, and Sandy, for sharing your expertise and meaningful impact supporters have had on the lives of countless families. And to all the attendees here today, as we continue to navigate the challenges presented by the COVID crisis, we just want to thank you for being there for the families in need. It's because of you that thousands of families have access to the critical services and supports that put them on the path to lasting independence, despite a global health pandemic. So thank you so much. As I mentioned earlier, this recording and the slides will be posted to our YouTube channel, and we'll be sending out a link to the recording as well. So please feel free to share these materials, and we'll be rebroadcasting this program next Monday at 3 o'clock Eastern Time. So thank you again, and enjoy the rest of your afternoon.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Melissa.